It is so wonderful to be back at the Eureka Centre today for Talking History. The last time I was here, nearly 2 years ago in April 2021, we were very carefully socially distanced in this theatre. Back then, I spoke about my research into men's sewing on the goldfields, at odds with needlework as a defining female occupation. Tonight, I'd like to return to the goldfields and to a man who didn't sew his clothes, but rather sold them to his community. So the research I'll be presenting emerges from my work as 2022 Redmond Barry Fellow for the wonderful State Library of Victoria Fellowships Program. As Anthony has already said, my particular fellowship was supported by State Library of Victoria and the University of Melbourne. And you'll see that I draw on material from both collections. My focus tonight is on the manufacturer and retailer Foy Gibson, though my fellowship research also incorporated a second much-loved Victorian clothing company that I know many of you will be familiar with, Fletcher Jones. But that's a story for another time. "100 years ago, Foy Gibson's extensive mills, then known as 2 miles of mills, dominated the inner Melbourne suburb of Collingwood. Woolen mills, spinning mills, and hosiery and knitting mills spread along Wellington, Cambridge, and Oxford streets, where exclusive warehouse conversions now stand. The slogan, "From the sheep's back to yours," pointed to Foy Gibson's use of Australian wool worked in these mills, then made into cloth and clothing to be sold from its flagship Smith Street store. And later at other stores in Melbourne and across Australia, including Perth, Brisbane and Adelaide. Many shopped in-store for their clothes, but rural consumers turned to Foy Gibson's mail order catalogues from the 1890s and across the first half of the 20th century to help make their selections. The catalogue's richly illustrated pages. Yes, am I too soft? Do you know we had this same problem last time? Let me lean in a little bit more, and apologies everyone. These catalogues are the inspiration for my presentation tonight, and I think you'll soon see why. They provide striking visual insights into the changing look, style, and sartorial sensibilities of Australians as clothing underwent radical transformations towards more relaxed and more revealing items of dress. Their pages too reflect Foy Gibson's strategies to entice consumers towards its affordable, good quality and wide-ranging products. They capture the ways in which Foy Gibson sought to educate consumers on the benefits of wearing wool and to ease consumer concern that lingered over caring for garments made from this natural fibre. They also encouraged a Buy Australian ethos and the promotion of Australian wool. And I'll work through each of these in my presentation today. But before I do, let's go back to the beginning. Foy Gibson's origins stretched decades before the catalogues that we'll explore were produced and decades before the mills dominated Collingwood's streetscape. Encouraged by the explosive news of the Victorian gold discoveries of the mid-19th century, Irish-born draper Mark Foy sailed to Melbourne in 1858. Like many others, Foy hoped to make his fortune here. Foy first worked for Buckley and Nunn in Bourke Street, from its humble beginnings in 1851 as a small drapery store, which you'll see on the left in this slide. Buckley and Nunn would later transform into one of Melbourne's largest department stores. You can see in the image on the right, it's positioned to the right of Myer. Foy saw great prospects and the possibility for a store of his own on the goldfields, rather than in Melbourne, serving diggers who were said to make money as fast as they could spend it. Spend money as fast as they could make it. He opened stores in Bendigo, then called Sandhurst, in Spring Creek, or Greytown, and in Castlemaine. From his wholesale butter store near the Castlemaine railway goods shed, he sold prime fresh butter, plus corned butter and potatoes grown in Lancefield. But it was his clothing store on Bendigo's major thoroughfare, Pall Mall, with partner Robert Bentley, that he experienced Goldfield's success. This illustration is of the thriving street depicted in 1864 by Samuel Calvert. It must have helped that Bentley and Foy, as the store was named, advertised extensively in the local Bendigo Advertiser. And I should add, these advertisements have helped me immensely in building up a picture of their Goldfield store. Advertisements for the store appeared almost daily from 1867, always printed on the newspaper's front page. The store could not be easily forgotten this way. One advertisement, running across 3 months from November 1867, revealed key elements of Bentley and Foy's business. Stock that moved quickly so that it was fresh, nice and new. Prices that were reasonable, if not really low. This particular ad has also captured my attention for another reason. Bentley and Foy's gentlemen's clothing was manufactured by their own tailors in Melbourne. Melbourne manufacture, as you know, is something that I'll return to. In 1868, a decade after Mark Foy's arrival in the colony, Bentley and Foy enlarged their shop front to meet the wants of an intelligent, appreciative public. The subjects of these portraits, taken around that time in Sandhurst, might very well have been the clientele they hoped to serve. In this extended new space, the store sold colonial-made suits, indicating they were tailored somewhere in Australia. The store also sold Crimean shirts and underflannels made on Sandhurst, so more specifically of local manufacture. Crimean shirts, like the one worn by this digger with its low, open V-neck in Eugene von Gerard's I Have Got It of 1854, made excellent workwear, as diggers had discovered the decade before. It's not surprising that they were made locally to meet this demand. Some of Bentley and Foy's stock also came from overseas. Flannel from Dewsbury in England was made by special order. Dewsbury was then a woolen textile manufacturing hub, though it was better known for producing what was called shoddy, a mixture of recycled and new wool that made a lower grade cloth. Bentley and Foy's table linen came from Belfast, then the global centre for linen manufacture. But Bentley and Foy also stocked so much more. Ladies' dress materials, kid gloves, stays, crinolines, shawls and bonnets. They also sold blankets of all kinds, plus rugs for the hardy bushman. In this you'll get a sense of the clientele Bentley and Foy served, what they called all classes of the community resident in and about Sandhurst. Another advertisement that ran across 5 months from May 1868 focused on Paris and London fashions for women sold in the new showroom. Paris was the heart of fashion, though London wasn't far behind. For women on the goldfields, recent arrivals dressed in the latest styles from these two fashion centres provided a visual reference point for current styles. The two elegantly dressed women in the foreground of Cuthbert Clark's illustration, sashaying through Castlemaine, might have provided a point of reference. Elizabeth Ramsay Lay almost certainly would have, wearing her Parisian trousseau in Castlemaine in the 1850s. When she published Social Life and Manners in Australia, being notes of 8 years' experience, in 1861, she explained her initial misgivings. She wrote, "I felt that at such a time a few homespun articles would be of more use and value to me than silk and ball dresses. But, my dear lady readers," she continued, "for your information let me observe, My Paris finery went out quite safely, and I had always the satisfaction of being dressed well and in good taste. Velvets and silks had arrived at Bentley and Foy's in 1868 from Lincolnshire, as had mantles or women's coats and shawls. Bentley and Foy also listed the sale of furs. Royal ermine was one, royal referring to the ermine pelts that had historically been used in royal robes in Europe. And this example of King George III's coronation robes is heavy with ermine pelts. Chinchilla, a rich thick fur, was another sold by Bentley and Foy. So were marten and stone marten, sable and French sable, mink and musquash furs. Bentley and Foy printed an astonishing advertisement in the Bendigo Advertiser in November 1868 that ran for the next 7 months. It spanned a full column of the paper's front page and is incredibly rich in detail, and I've outlined it here in purple. Customers were assured that Bentley and Foy's stock imported from Great Britain was exclusively for the residents of Sandhurst, meaning their fashions would not be seen elsewhere in the colony. Ladies' dress materials came from the factories in and around Glasgow and Paisley, Manchester, Norwich, Bradford, Leeds and London. By this time, Bentley and Foy claimed their firm was doing the largest trade between Melbourne and the Murray. Their success was apparently won through keeping only fresh new goods, by making only small profits on each article, but that added up with their many sales, and by employing only respectful assistants. Female customers were, the advertisement assured, waited upon by ladies of unobtrusive, suave manners, and the lady customer can almost imagine herself in her own drawing room. Moving stock was important, and Bentley and Foy kept nothing from year to year, avoiding shop-worn, seedy, worthless goods, as they described. Nay, the advertisement explained, their goods are constantly to be seen, as it were, with a fresh bloom upon them. For men, there were trousers and vests of colonial manufacture that were beautiful and good. There were also shirts and hats of all kinds. For women, they sold honest, well-made silks, not like those glittering things called French silks. Bad, flashy silks could be blamed on the present French Emperor Napoleon III, nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, who had developed a commercial treaty to sell these silks. Bentley and Foy also sold an exciting new black silk that was evocatively described as rich, thick, soft, like to the touch of the top of cream in a country dairy. I think there's something so beautiful about that description. This silk was manufactured from Queensland silkworms. For Sandhurst's ladies concerned that they might appear in the same dress fabric as one of the uncombed, unwashed, uncared-for denizens of our neighbourhood as they walked along the mall and brushed skirts with her, they received reassurance. Bentley and Foy don't cultivate trade of that kind. That is, the uncombed and unwashed. And I must confess, I quickly double-checked that nobody was wearing the same dress as me before I read that line, in case that was awkward. It also helped that Bentley and Foy kept small stocks of patterns which they could constantly change. This didn't mean that Bentley and Foy only served genteel ladies. The store also stocked fabrics for servants' dresses. Rather, the distinction made was between respectable and non-respectable women, like the diggers' wives who had by that time been the subject of derision for almost 2 decades for flaunting gaudy, expensive dress and accessories that lacked subtle good taste. Taste mattered to Bentley and Foy, despairing of the large, vulgar patterns or stripes worn by some Yankees as they explained. These patterns only suited African Americans or South Sea Islanders, the advertisement declared, not Europeans who looked better in small, neat patterns. I've gone through Bentley and Foy advertisements in detail because they reveal a really rich range of strategies that Foy would use when he returned from the goldfields to Melbourne shortly after. These included extensive advertising to keep his goods at the front of customers' minds, included a network of contacts to source quality overseas stock, and an interest in colonial manufacture, something that he embraced wholeheartedly when he returned to Melbourne. The partnership between Mark Foy and Robert Bentley dissolved in 1870. Bentley remained in Sandhurst with the drapery and clothing business. Foy returned to Melbourne, opening a store in Collingwood. His timing was exquisite. By the 1880s, Melbourne's prosperity had led to the moniker of Marvellous Melbourne, and Foy's store sat at the heart of one of its main shopping thoroughfares. Despite the earlier advertisement from Sandhurst criticising French silks, one of Foy's first advertisements for the new Smith Street store promoted the sale of the best silks from Paris. These had been shipped to London, then Melbourne, at the advance of the Prussians on Paris for the Franco-Prussian War. He would not be a savvy businessman, it appears, if he didn't capitalise on opportunities like this presented by war. He continued to source dress fabrics from Europe across years to follow. Foreign goods held cachet, and he encouraged ladies to view his merchandise from Paris, Aberdeen, Belfast, and elsewhere. One of his advertisements in The Age in 1873 listed silk from Spitalfields, what had been the centre of the silk industry for centuries, but was by then in decline. The same advertisement included shawls that he noted were manufactured in Geelong from honest, real wool, without cotton or shoddy mixture. Ladies, would you kindly call at my establishment and inspect these stalls, he implored. I'd like to pause a moment here to direct your attention to two developments. The first, as I've just mentioned, is the promotion of Victorian manufactured goods in wool. The second, that same year, was Foy seeking not only metropolitan customers for his new Collingwood store. In the Weekly Times, he alerted ladies of Victoria, so not just Melbourne, to his goods. Those who wished to see his pattern fabrics could write and request samples. Thus, people residing in the country are placed in the same favourable position to purchasers in the metropolis, he assured. We'll fast forward another decade to 1883, when Scotsman William Gibson, also an experienced draper, entered as partner to the business. The store was renamed Foy and Gibson. Though the partnership was short-lived, dissolving in 1884, this name endured across decades to follow. And you can see it here in the first decade of the 20th century. Mark Foy's health had deteriorated, and he handed the reins to his son Francis Foy. But Francis and William Gibson struggled to work together. Both decided it was better for one to buy the other out. They apparently tossed a coin to see who should keep the business, with Foy winning, but then conceding to Gibson, who so clearly hoped to keep the business himself. Francis Foy left for Sydney, opening another hugely successful store that you might recognise, named Mark Foy's, in honour of his father and original Goldfields storekeeper. And this is the grand Mark Foy's building in Sydney in 1909. So William Gibson remained, and in 1890 brought his nephews Samuel Gibson and John McClelland in as partners to the business. And this decade, the 1890s, witnessed enormous growth. A new store opened in Perth in 1896, with this photograph taken a decade later. A new factory built in Collingwood manufactured socks and other knitted goods. Foy Gibson declared itself to be the largest manufacturers and the largest retail distributors in Australia that decade. It enlarged its Collingwood premises, offered luxuriously appointed lifts with experienced attendants conveying visitors to the upper floors. And it arranged its various departments for customer comfort and convenience. It produced thousands of pounds of colonial manufactured goods each week with its dressmaking, shirt, clothing and furniture factories. Though in the space of a single week, it might also import goods valued at tens of thousands of pounds. A London office established in 1897 sourced stock from English and European suppliers. The Edgeley Mill began operation this decade too, expanding the woolens produced to blankets and a wide range of cloths. Woolen products sold under its Gibsonia brand, and the mills continued to grow. Foy Gibson declared them to be the biggest of their kind in the Commonwealth in the 1920s, noting the end was not yet nearly in sight. To make the type of woolen garments that can honestly be called first class, a promotional booklet produced that decade explained, the foundation must be good, sound wool. The source of that wool was important, and the booklet continued, of all the world's productions in this valuable staple, Australia can claim the first place for quality. Foy Gibson knit Australian wool into hosiery and underwear and sold it as yarn for home knitting. It produced 50 different cloths for men's and women's wear: velours, hapsacks, twills, check and fancy tweeds, heavier weight cloths for coats and mantles, men's suitings in different weights for Australia's varying climate. These were dyed in the Gibsonia Mill's dye house in a range of shades according to the season's fashions. By the end of the 1920s, Foy Gibson used close to 3 million pounds of wool per year, roughly equivalent to 1,300 tonnes. It produced more than 8 million miles of Gibsonia woolen and worsted yarns. It produced 1.5 million pairs of Gibsonia socks and stockings, 1 million yards of Gibsonia worsted and woolen cloths, 620,000 yards of Gibsonia underwear. The numbers are so large they're hard to read. 575,000 yards of Gibsonia flannels and shirting fabrics, and more cloths and goods still. 3,000 employees worked in the mills to manufacture Foy Gibson's all Australian woolens, garments and fabrics. Foy Gibson's operations comprised more than just the woolen items that are my focus. In the mid-1930s, when it became a proprietary company, Foy Gibson's objectives were breathtakingly expansive. It manufactured itself or imported textile fabrics of all kinds, as haberdashers, furriers, milliners, dressmakers, tailors, hatters, glovers, boot and shoe manufacturers. It also dealt in leather goods, household furniture, ironmongery, household fittings and utensils, ornaments and fancy goods. For all this, however, wool remained at the centre of its operations. This is not surprising when across the 19th and into the 20th century, the Australian wool industry had strengthened, then surged, reshaping the global wool market. Wool was critical to Australia's economy, so much so that you'll all know the saying, Australia riding on the sheep's back. A much greater proportion of the nation's wool sold for export. In the 1920s, 94% of Australia's wool was exported, By 1939, however, closer to 90% of the Australian wool clip was sold over to overseas markets. While this perhaps seems like little Australian wool manufacturing locally, I'd like to suggest that 10% of Australia's wool clip was not insignificant. Nor was the number of workers directly involved in growing and manufacturing wool. Around 84,000 wool growers, more than 19,000 workers in woolen and worsted factories, and close to 17,000 workers producing hosiery and knitted goods across Australia. When Foy Gibson encouraged its customers to buy Australian wool, it was not unique in connecting Australia's major industry directly with consumers. The Sydney department store Gowing Brothers encouraged its customers with the slogan, "Australian wool for Australian people." The Australian Knitting Mills promoted its golden fleece underwear as locally made for loyal Australians. Developing Australian textile and clothing manufacturing and reducing imported goods drove these kinds of promotions, increasing the push to purchase goods made in Australia from the first decade of the 20th century in particular. Australian-made textiles are equal to the best in the world, the Made in Australia Council encouraged in the Textile Journal of Australia in 1935. Buy them and give more employment to your fellow countrymen, the council urged. So let's return now to those mail order catalogues that Foy Gibson produced for the spring, summer and autumn-winter seasons. I'd like to flick through some of the pages for you, giving you a sense of the enormous, exciting range of goods available. Many of the clothes in wool, but certainly not all, but most likely in another natural fibre, remembering that synthetics like nylon, polyester and acrylic only really became available after the Second World War. Though Foy Gibson catalogues were produced from the 1890s, the earliest I've seen is this one, the 1902 Winter catalogue. Women could browse pages of hats in felt, velvet and straw, embellished with ostrich feathers and silk rosettes or bows. They could buy lengths of fabric, tweeds, tartans and more in wool, velvets and velveteens, silks, muslins and black cloths made for those in mourning. The latest styles in capes and coats inspired by London and Paris fashions appeared, as did more serviceable everyday styles. Blouses and skirts were plentiful, and I especially like this page of the catalogue because at the bottom left it shows a riding costume for horse riding, and at the bottom right the new cycling costume showing how the skirt could split around the wheels. Cycling had become popular the decade before, though not without concern that it might be improper for ladies. Full skirts posed hazards for women on bicycles when they could get caught, leading to new styles, especially for this activity, including knickerbockers, shorter skirts or divided skirts. Underwear made in Foy Gibson's own factories prevented what the catalogue declared as the conveyance of infectious diseases, which sometimes happens with goods made in insanitary workshops or houses, the implications being that Foy Gibson was very sanitary. The link between infection and fabric worn against the skin continued to resonate with customers. Foy Gibson also produced pure natural wool underwear in its mills. Spencer blouses, seen at the top, and in the middle, woolen bloomers, together with combinations and woolen nightdresses. Perfect fitting corsets created the distinctive S-shaped silhouette of that decade, starting low on the bust and pushing the hips back. Lace collars were plentiful, as were fur necklets that hugged the throat, cashmere and cotton hosiery that kept the feet snug, and kid and fabric gloves for the hands. An enormous range of haberdashery could also be purchased: thread, buttons, bonings, bindings, braids, and much more still. Men's choices were similarly expansive. Foy and Gibson made men's suits and overcoats to measure, like these here, or ready-made. Tailor-made remained preferable for men this decade, though Foy and Gibson assured that in its ready-made clothing that strict attention was paid to the fit and that styles are up to date, copying as closely as possible the best tailor-made work. Gentlemen who wear our ready-made clothing find it compares very favourably with much of the order made elsewhere, and the prices are 25 to 35% lower. This saving must have been an inducement for some, though for men working in professions, many would have still preferred made-to-measure suits. For underneath their suits, men could purchase all-wool underwear. Made in Foy and Gibson's mills, this used only the purest and best wool available. Men's underpants that extended to the ankle and buttoned at the fly appeared. Singlets also featured, though not in the sleeveless garment we now know, but with sleeves to the wrist and a button placket at the neck. Braces, belts and gloves for evening wear in silk and in leather for walking or driving appeared across the pages. So did an array of stiffened, detachable collars and shirt fronts. This range of collars of varying heights and folds would grow even larger in years to follow. One of the styles was named Melbourne and another Masher, presumably after the fashionable young men in England of that name in the late 19th century. The range of collars could be worn with a choice of neckwear, ties and bows in varying shapes, widths, lengths, colours and patterns. Collar studs, tie cuffs, cufflinks were plentiful. So were handkerchiefs in linen, lawn and silk. Outfits were topped by felt hats with square or round crowns and various width brims. Youth and children's clothes also appeared in this 1902 catalogue, as did other items for the home, including linoleum, rugs and carpets, furniture, mattresses and bedding, perambulators, dinner sets, glassware, lamps, stoves, clocks, cutlery, saddlery, sporting equipment, dolls and toys, perfumes, medicines, hair restorers, stationery, books and groceries. You can see why then Foy and Gibson might have selected this illustration for the cover's back page. With this enormous range of goods, it's not surprising the company employed at this time 2,250 people across the warehouses and factories you see here. So in this final part of my presentation now, I wanted to focus your attention even more closely on the catalogues, ranging across a number of years and looking at a particular item of dress that has really captured my attention this summer. I hope that doing this will give you a taste of what I see as the really exciting possibilities for mining these catalogues in ways that tell us about shifting styles and shifting lifestyles, about time and place, and also about being Australian. So, to do this, I'd like to direct your attention to woolen swimsuits. I wrote a short piece for the online outlet, The Conversation, and chatted about the past and future of woolen swimsuits on a number of radio stations across the summer break, and I really loved every second of it. The Foy and Gibson catalogues really helped me to shape my thinking, particularly when I've been interested in how Foy and Gibson communicated the tactile or material properties of woolen swimwear to country customers and the enticements they used to generate purchases. This might be through emphasising fashionable new styles in swimwear, through creating an increasingly firm and more comfortable fit, or through access to a particular lifestyle when Australians' adoration of the beach was solidifying at this time. So we've long loved the golden sands and crashing waves of Australia's beaches. The beach was considered therapeutic for its invigorating, fresh sea air, its surf and its sun bronzing the skin. It was different from and understood as healthier than time in a swimming pool, given the pool was a stagnant body of water. Instead, seawater moved dynamically around bathing bodies. So what we've worn for a day at the water's edge transformed across the first decades of the 20th century as attitudes to the exposure of bodies relaxed and ideas around public morality and near nakedness transformed. Young men and women followed an increasingly active and sporting lifestyle, and swimsuits for both shrank as a result. The rapid transformation in swimwear styling is one of the reasons for my particular interest in these decades. So is the move in what Foy Gibson swimsuits were made from, either from woven cotton or woven wool according to preference before the First World War. By the war's end, Foy Gibson's bathing suits could be purchased in 4 different cloth variations: in a woven cotton, a finely woven wool, a heavier weight wool, or a blend of heavyweight wool and cotton. Women's loose skirted styles, as this illustration at the left suggests, were made for the shoreline. The photograph at the right from Lorne in 1920 gives an impression of what happened when these skirts were wet, tangling through the legs and sagging against the body. More woolen styles for women and men became available in the 1920s. One woman's style seen in the top row at the left was of woven wool and had shoulder-revealing straps, seen in Foy Gibson's swimsuit for the very first time. Men's all-wool two-piece costumes could be purchased with short sleeves or no sleeves at all. Sleeves were especially good for children, the catalogue pointed out, to prevent sunburn in a nod to the heat of the sun. New Gibsonia branded woolen swimsuits entered the market in the 1920s. Exciting colours, edgings, panels and necklines were incorporated into the designs, including a women's sailor style with a girdle around the waist. The description for the swimsuit in the upper right. Some were still woven wool, but increasingly the Gibsonia swimsuits were knitted. At the same time, the illustrated beach scene backdrops became ever more inviting, revealing that these suits were made for experiencing the beach as a social space, just as they were for active swimming. Men could purchase what were called bathing Vs. These look strikingly similar to today's swimming briefs or pudgy smugglers, but that laced at the side, and you can see these in the middle right of this page from the 1923-24 catalogue. These illustrations from the 1920s reveal the silhouette that decade, slim and straight for women, unlike the curves of previous decades. Bold geometric designs were favoured in bathing gowns. Women's short, sleek, bobbed hair might be covered by rubber bathing caps that could also be embellished. The possibilities for activity were enhanced by new fits. The all-wool Gibsonia Portsea swimsuit on the man running at the top centre here was described as an ideal garment for bathing and beachwear, consisting of a close-fitting combination and loose-fitting knickers secured by a patent belt. The belt was important when moving through the surf and appeared on both men's and women's styles. The swimsuit illustrated on the man seated on the stand could be purchased in 2 pieces or joined. The joined style, the catalogue explained, was preferred by life-saving clubs. By 1928, Gibsonia swimsuit style names gestured to the really clear connotations of time spent at the beach. The red and black swimsuit in the centre of this page was named Sunny Beach. Men could also buy the Sunny Beach or the Sunbath swimsuits that year. Foy Gibson also remarked in the 1928 catalogue that its Gibsonia swimsuits were used by the leading life-saving clubs, and that any style or any design could be made specially to order. This was important when different clubs were distinguished by colour and design, like the distinctive diagonal stripes seen on these men from the Coolangatta Lifesaving Club. The link between lifesaving and the catalogue was perhaps also a nod to the fact that the bronzed, fit and strong lifesaver had become an Australian national icon in the interwar period, a man admired for his body as much as he was for putting his life at risk to save others. It's not surprising then that over these years, swimwear was tied to an articulation of a particular kind of Australian masculinity. Timing was critical, occurring as it did alongside and in the aftermath of the return of First World War servicemen, some physically maimed, others suffering shell shock or other ongoing health issues. Australia's lifesavers represented a flawless hero as Australians reeled, then recovered from war. At the end of the 1920s and into the 1930s, Foy Gibson began to describe the feel of its swimsuits, as you can see in the heading on the left. Bathing costumes that look, feel, and are the best. The aim was a firm feel, now achieved through closely knitting wool. Men's suits that year were described as made in the new elastic stitch that produced close-fitting garments. In 1930-31, Foy Gibson launched its Siren swimsuit for men and women, with a patent covering its key feature. This swimsuit had only one thickness of knitted wool over the hips for a more streamlined, less bulky fit. The Siren was available in two cuts. One was called Speed and the other Suntan, suggesting a new market had emerged, specifically designed for active use or for leisure. Whichever cut was selected, the catalogue assured potential customers that the Siren fit the body closely without the slightest tightness or hampering effect. The Siren suits, it also outlined, were made solely of wool. Close-fitting swimsuits continued to improve, including with the men's Sea-Fit swimsuit. Described as the latest achievement in men's swimsuits, the elastic rib stitch gave the close-fitting effect so desirable, as the catalogue put it, with this illustration a much closer fit than even the year before. The added benefit, in the words of the catalogue's writer, was that the Sea-Fit provided the utmost freedom and comfort in movement to its wearer. This freedom and comfort was vividly suggested in women's swimsuits in 1931, with one illustrated on this gorgeous back cover, executing a perfect dive in her knitted suit. The style of swimsuit that she wore came in exciting colour combinations, including navy and jade, and cardinal red and cinnamon. When Foy Gibson's all-wool Swift men's suit was advertised in 1934, it had approved yet again. The Swift suit was knitted in a shape-retaining rib stitch and was specially resistant to the fading properties of salt water and sun. These fade-resistant suits were intended for those who spent long periods of time at the beach, like these heavily tanned young surfers who tease their mate for wearing a backless swimsuit at Bondi. In a few short years, it's likely that all of these men would have been revealing far more revealing swimsuits when the mid-1930s marked the transition to wearing trunks. The following decade would also mark the beginning of a transition to new synthetic fabrics for swimwear that worked in very different ways in the water and hugged the body even tighter than before. I might have left you thinking across the last 10 minutes or so about wool's tendency to sag when wet, or to shrink when it comes out of the water and dries again. But the Foy and Gibson catalogues had long addressed the problems of combining wool and water, particularly in the confusion over how to best wash wool. This was particularly for its undergarments, which you'll see from this 1910 catalogue and others to follow. And these are the recommended washing instructions. So warm but not hot soapy water should be used, to which cloudy ammonia had been added. This was a multi-purpose cleaner used in the laundry and elsewhere. Foy and Gibson assured that woolen items washed this way were virtually non-shrinking, though it also helped that woolen cloth was shrunk after it was woven in the mills. You might be wondering what became of Foy and Gibson. A number of acquisitions following the post-war years culminated in Cox Brothers purchasing the retail stores in 1955. This included the then landmark Foy and Gibson store on the corner of Burke and Swanson Streets, with its rooftop fun park that had a merry-go-round, Ferris wheel, mini railway, pony rides and fairy floss. Cox Foy, as it was then known, added a number of Australian stores to its operations, including the popular Ballarat department store Moorsheads, Bowrings in Mildura, Myers in Bendigo, and Brighton Hitchcocks in Geelong. A staff induction booklet the following decade reminded workers that the story of Foy and Gibson does not end there. And it explained, firmly entrenched in public esteem and with the certain knowledge that it has played and is playing its part in the progress of the state, Foy and Gibson maintains its onward march, resourceful, efficient, and thoroughly worthy of the sound principles on which it was founded. Though its name disappeared in Melbourne, Perth and Adelaide across the 60s and 70s following further acquisitions, Foy and Gibson had a profound effect on the thousands of workers in its mills and retail stores, on the people who made and sold its clothing, and on the generations of Australians who wore its Australian-made goods. From Goldfields store to national powerhouse, Foy and Gibson reached customers on city streets and rural backwaters, dressing them in good quality, well-priced clothing. This clothing had wool, the best and the finest Australia could produce, at its centre. Thank you.